Good afternoon, everyone. So, my report is about implementing teams in organizations. Implementing teams in organizations is not easy. It takes a lot of hard work, time, training, and patience. Changing from a traditional organizational structure to a team based structure is much like other organizational changes, which we discuss in Chapter 19. Making the decision. Quite often, the leadership for the change is the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, or another prominent person in top management. Regardless of the position, the person leading the change needs to first is to have a strong belief that employees want to be responsible for their own work. 2. Be able to demonstrate the team philosophy. Number 3. Articulate a coherent vision of the team environment. And the last is to have the creativity and authority to overcome obstacles as they surface. The steering committee can be of any workable size, from 2 to 10 people who are influential and know the work and the organization. Members may include plant or division managers, union representatives, human resource department representatives, and operational level employees. Work of the steering committee includes visits to sites that might be candidates for utilizing work teams, visits to currently successful work teams, data gathering and analysis, low-key discussions, and deliberating and deciding whether to use of a consultant during the change process. A feasibility study is a necessity before making the decision to use teams. After the leadership has been established, the steering committee has been set up, and a feasibility study has been conducted. The go or no go decision can be made. The committee and top management will need to decide jointly to go ahead if conditions are right. Preparing for implementation. Preparation consists of the following 5 steps. So take note of this 5 step, guys. Number 1 is clarifying the mission. Second, selecting the site for the first work teams. And the third, preparing the design team. And the fourth, planning the transfer of authority. And lastly is drafting the preliminary plan. So, the mission statement is simply an expression of purpose that summarizes the long range benefits the company hopes to gain by moving to a team environment. It must be consistent with the organization's strategy as it establishes a common set of assumptions for executives, middle managers, support staff, and the teams. The mission can focus on continuous environment improvement, employee involvement, increasing performance, competition, customer satisfaction, and contributions to society. Next is the design team. Is a select group of employees, supervisors, and managers who will work out the staffing and operational details to make the teams perform well. They select the initial team members, prepares members and managers for teams, changes work processes for use with the team design, and plans the transition from the current state to the new self-managed teams. The design team usually spends the first 3 months learning from the steering committee, visiting sites where teams are being used successfully, and spending a significant amount of time and classroom training. Considering the composition of the team is one of the most important decisions the design team has to make. Planning the transfer of authority from management to teams is the most important phase of planning the implementation. It is also the most distinctive and difficult part of moving to a team based organization. It is difficult because it is so different from the traditional hierarchical organization management system. It is a gradual process, one that takes from 2 to 5 years in most situations. So, the last stage of planning the implementation is to write the tentative plan for the initial work teams. The draft plan combines the work of the steering and design committees and becomes the primary working document that guides the continuing work of the design teams and the first work teams. So, the draft plan number 1 recommends a process for selecting the people who will be on the first teams. Second, describes roles and responsibilities for all the people who will be affected: team members, team leaders, facilitators, support teams, managers, and top management. And 3, explains what training the several groups will need. And the fourth, identifies specifically which work processes will be involved. Number 5, describes what other organizational systems will be affected. And the last, lays out preliminary master schedule for the next 2 to 3 years. And let's move on to phase of implementation. Implementation. Phases of implementation. The first phase is the startup. In this phase, team members are selected and prepared to work in teams so that the teams have the best possible chance of success. Much of the initial training is informational or awareness training that sends the message that top management is firmly committed to teams and the teams are not experimental. The second is the reality and unrest. So, after perhaps 6 to 9 months, team members and managers report frustration and confusion about the ambiguities of the new situation. For employees, unfamiliar tasks, more responsibility, and worry about job security replace hope for the opportunities presented by new approach. And the best advice is to perform phase 1 very well and then make managers very visible. Continue to work to clarify the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved and reinforce the positive behaviors that do occur. And phase 3 is the leader-centered teams. The team begins to think of itself as a unit as members learn to manage themselves. Managers begin to get a sense of the positive possibilities of organizing in teams and begin to withdraw slowly from the daily operation of the unit to begin focusing on standards, regulations, systems, and resources for the team. On the other hand, if the company appointed leaders are the former managers, team members have trouble believing that anything has really changed. Team appointed leaders can be a problem if the leaders are not trained properly and oriented toward team goals. But if the team appointed leader is ineffective, the team usually recognizes the problem and makes the adjustments necessary to get the team back on track. And the second important issue for this phase is to help each team develop its own sense of identity. Visits to observe mature teams in action can be a good step for newly formed teams. Recognizing teams and individuals for good performance is always powerful, especially when the team choose the recipients. And phase 4 is the tightly formed teams. They are solving problems, managing their schedule and resources, and resolving internal conflicts. However, communication with external teams begins to diminish. The team covers up for underperforming members, and inter-team rivalries can turn sour, leading to unhealthy competition. First, teams need to keep the communication channels with other teams open through councils of rotating team representatives who meet regularly to discuss what works and what does not. Teams who communicate and cooperate with other teams should be rewarded. Second, management needs to provide performance feedback through computer terminals in the work area that give up to late information on performance or via regular feedback meetings. Third, teams need to follow the previously developed plan to transfer authority and responsibility to the teams and to be sure that all team members have followed the plan to get training and all of the skills necessary to do the work of the team. And by the end of the phase 4, the team should be ready to take responsibility for managing itself. Phase 5 is the self-managing teams. In this phase is the end result of the months of year of planning and implementation. Mature teams are meeting or exceeding their performance goals. Team members are taking responsibility for team-related leadership functions. Although the teams are mature and functioning quite well, several things need to be done to keep them on track. And the first is individuals and teams need zonal process in organizations to continue their training in job skills and team and interpersonal skills. Second, support systems need to be constantly improved to facilitate team development and productivity. And the third, teams always need to improve their internal customer and supplier relationships within the organization. Partnerships among teams throughout the organization can help the internal teams continue to meet the needs of external customers. And that ends my report on of implementation on organization.